So really, this is just a great conversation, and we're trying to highlight and show the depth and breadth of talent on our campus in the faculty. And you're part of the CLA contingent who we thought would kind of best display some of that talent. So thanks for doing what you do. And I'm just going to start off with some questions and we'll see where we go. So, so someone who I know quite well, Nielan, but tell us, how did you come to work at Cal State Long Beach? What's your history?
Well, my history is that I love Southern California. And
Okay.
so I finished high school in San Diego. I did my undergrad at San Diego State. So I'm a proud CSU alum.
Yeah.
And I did my graduate work at UCSD. And when I was on the market, I carpet bombed. I sent out about 60 applications and I had 4 interviews, and ultimately the only one in Southern California was CSU LB. And I had a very strong interest in formation in teaching at UCSD. And so I really was very much interested in being at a teaching focused institution that also provided the opportunities to do research and of course service. So, really in a nutshell, it just kind of meshed with my life plan and my love of being in Southern California.
Fantastic. And for those of you who don't know Nielan is a professor in sociology, and she investigates her current research is in intersectional dimensions of LGBTQ, immigration from Mexico to the US and Canada, and she teaches a range of courses and is very active in service, so an absolute star in terms of faculty. So thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then going on to you, Lewis. Now, I mean, I would like you to boast about the things that you do, but one of the things that Lewis does is he's in charge of our moot court director. And for those of you who don't know, our students go from success to success. And of course, that's partly because they're so brilliant, but also because their mentor and guide is. So, Lewis, with that introduction, tell us, how did you come to work at CSULB and how did you get involved with the moot court?
Well, let me take the first one first. Sort of like maybe many modern husbands, I followed my wife. My wife was really the star of the family, I should emphasize.
Good God, she must be outstanding. Yeah.
Yes. She was a tenured track professor at LSU, and I was not going anywhere in Louisiana. We came out here to a wedding, and I said to her something about, it was February and the weather was great, and do you think you could ever get a job out here? And she said, yeah, there's one actually in my field being advertised, but I didn't think you'd be interested. I'm from the East Coast. She didn't think I'd ever be interested in living in California. And the weather's a lot better, so I said, sure. Similarly, when I came out here, I sent letters to basically every school in Southern California, being completely unaware of where places were. I applied as far as Pomona, and they offered me a class that said, you don't want this. It's a 2-hour commute each way. So the first year, I was at 3 different campuses, 3 different CSUs. I was fortunate enough that Chuck Noble, who was the chair at the time, took a shine to me, I guess, and offered me a contract. Cal State Long Beach competes in the American Moot Court Association's tournaments. I guess there's been about 20 or 21 oral advocacy champions, and I don't remember how many exactly written brief champions there have been. We're one of 2 public universities to win the oral advocacy national championship. For a while, we were the only one, which was kind of a neat bragging right. We've won the written advocacy 3 times, so I suppose that we're maybe 3rd in combined national championships. And we actually just won the written brief national championship 2 days ago. The truth is, I get a lot of credit for this. I have wonderful assistant coaches, a great many of whom are alums, and I really have terrific students. And I really need to share all this with, really with them. This year we competed in, I guess it was 9, and we won 7 of them. At one point we won something like 6 in a row or something like that. So They really do well. We are an elite program. One of the first things I say to my students when they come in is that, in the David and Goliath, most of the time we're the Goliath, and you need to get used to that. Other programs get very motivated to beat us, and they have to push back. This year, we beat a number of prestigious universities. I won't necessarily list them here. It sounds like we're bragging, but it was a good year. It truly was. So.
Fantastic. Well, as Goliath, all you need to do is avoid slingshots, and we're good. So anyway, it's certainly a testament to the outstanding excellence of both our students and faculty. So Lewis is a professor in the political science department, for those of you who don't know him, and a great exemplar again of our outstanding faculty. So Jeanelle, you are a more recent joiner in Cal State's CLA Anthropology department, and you're a biological anthropologist, so an example of transdisciplinary expertise. You apparently, and I like this myself, you like to shine a light on the big picture. So in terms of that, let's move to another question and say, how has this unbelievable COVID-19 and alternative modes of instruction surprised you? How have you adapted to it in this brave new world?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually really enjoy teaching online, which is surprising to me. I never would have fathomed that I would have liked it. But I sort of saw it as an exercise in creativity, and I really jumped into it this summer, when we had time to prepare, and I learned some new tricks. I learned Adobe After Effects, very basic animation on Adobe After Effects. I started using Qualtrics, and so I kind of just saw it as a way to be creative with the way I present information. So it was in a sense freeing, and I enjoy that aspect of it. So that surprised me about myself that I actually enjoy teaching online.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's so interesting I get a little bit of a bird's eye view of all the faculty and the reactions to the alternative means of instruction range from your reaction, which is, hey, this is quite interesting and I can be creative, all the way to, oh my God, when is this going to end, and when am I going to go back into my face-to-face comfort zone, and everywhere in between. It's remarkable. So, but again, I think it points to not only the creativity and innovation of our faculty, but just that passion to teach, which I think characterize us all, finds a way to express itself, whatever the mechanism is that we teach with. Of course, we have our preferred modes. Maybe I shouldn't reveal this, but my preferred mode was chalk and board, but maybe I would have adapted too. Anyway, terrific, Jeanelle, welcome, and we're so pleased you're here with us, and delighted that you found it a way to express your creativity. Now, Ilan Mitchell-Smith is a professor of English and a former actor. A co-star in the film Weird Science, which some of you may have seen, but now we're very lucky to have him in our English department. And so, Ilan, maybe a different question, based on what you're doing now, teaching and research and service, what are some recommendations or ideas, solutions you have for all of us to navigate this time?
I don't know that I have a lot of recommendations. I don't know that I think highly enough of my own choices yet to recommend them to others. But I do have aspirations, and my aspirations, I think, come from some moments that I wish I had handled differently, and that I think I might do better in the future. I think mainly, I think at this time, important to prioritize in a way that really respects people's time, and especially puts empathy as a main goal. Last semester, I had a student who was giving a presentation on Zoom, and during the class, he messaged me, and during the break, and he said, "Listen, you'll have to tell me exactly when I'm going to start, because I have like a 10-minute window where I have to go into a back room and tell my mother to watch my brother," and like, there was a whole thing. And honestly, the presentation could have been handled in a different way. I could have had him write it up. I could have accepted a different way. He didn't even really think to offer an alternative. And so this semester, I'm trying to do that. And I'm trying to take every step just to anticipate those things that I don't know that our students are dealing with. And I guess if I'm not crazy about teaching over Zoom, but if I'm thankful for anything, I think that this emergency has sharpened my attention towards those issues that somewhere deep down I believed anyway, right? Like I did, like a lot of us, I think, used to police student electronics in class, like no phones out. I didn't like laptops at all. When I'm back in the classroom, I might go back to that. But I think it's a bad look at this point to try too hard to do that over Zoom. You know what I mean? And so it forces me, and I think all of us, it invites us at least, to really focus on what the topic is that we're teaching. And if we're losing student attention, it might just be that we need a concrete example, that we've been abstract for too long, and that's a good pedagogical place to be in my mind. So I think I'm fronting empathy, I'm changing my priorities, and I'm trying to use, like Jeanelle mentioned, I'm trying to use those tools that are available to us to the extent that I can, without asking my students to master a new technology.
Right. Well, I think, what I hear you saying is so important to me, and this kind of the education is about building relationships between instructor and student, and how we do that is far more important than, that we do that is far more important than how we do it. And whether we do it via technology, which seems to me somewhat inferior, but no doubt has its benefits. If we can succeed in establishing that relationship, then we can effectively instruct. And so that's a remarkable discovery.
Provost, can I just speak to Sure. I actually love the Zoom, this experience. I must say that I, in a lot of ways, enjoy this more than face-to-face. It's made my life a lot better in many ways. And I run an intern program with the Long Beach Courthouse, which was closed.
Sure.
Smack dab in the middle of this, I was teaching a class and it closed. So what I did for this year was, because, I know a lot of lawyers and such all around the country, I turned it completely into a guest speaker class where there are reading assignments, but then I bring in speakers. I brought in the Solicitor General of West Virginia. I've had them speak to judges. I've had them who've come in and spoken to them. I've had
Sounds like a great opportunity. Wow.
Just attorney, assistant U.S. attorneys. I've had them talk to, and all around the nation. And what I did was take a class that gave them a lot of specific information about one court, sacrificed that for the breadth. And rather than just me talking to them for 15 weeks about something they're not seeing for themselves, I pivoted. And I think that going forward, if I'm allowed to, I'm going to ask for permission to have the class be on Zoom that day, because I can't fly those people to Southern California, but I can get them in, and I think our students will benefit from that. And, that's just, anybody can do that in probably any area, any discipline. So,
before we go on with things, I just want to jump on that because, let's talk about that, because remember, it's faculty who have control of mode of instruction. So you can absolutely teach your class as a hybrid, as a Zoom, provided you go through the regular Senate channels. And, obviously in an emergency like we have now, we have emergency regulations, but there's no need to ask anyone. You just have to go through the procedure to develop a hybrid or a partly Zoom or as needed. So
Did not know that.
Faculty should be empowered. Jeanelle, I wanted to sort of ask you, we talked a lot about empathy already with our students, but what advice do you have for our students? How do we help them? How do we reach them? How do we help them learn in this tough time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I don't have a blanket piece of advice, but I can just say what I've been telling them. A lot of them are hard on themselves. I try to tell them, it's okay. Don't be too hard on yourself. There's a pandemic. There's a, social uprising. There's political unrest. There's a lot of things going on. Don't be too hard on yourself. Have 2020 standards, not 2019 standards. So, and I try to have, try to emphasize some, mental well-being practices. I tell them in the words of Audre Lorde, self-care is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation. So, and whatever that means to you, for some people it means bubble baths on Sundays. For some people it means putting boundaries, or sleeping in, and sometimes you have to miss class that morning just to take care of yourself and center yourself. So I try to tell my students to relieve some pressure off of themselves. And if things don't work out this semester, school will always be here. You can always go back and take that class again if you want to. But your family's health, your health, should not be compromised.
Gosh, words of wisdom. And Jeanelle, I think I want to take one of your classes.
Okay.
Talk sort of on the same lines, Nielan. So, you probably have seen, or maybe you haven't, but just so that you know, I recently actually, yesterday, finalized a draft letter to be sent to all RTP committees and chairs and so on, saying basically what Jeanelle said, that, this is 2020 in the middle of a pandemic. Yes, there are rules we have to follow, but be flexible and make your decision based on where we are, not where we think we might be. What other advice would you have for the campus, Nielan? I mean, for me, what should I be doing that I haven't been? And
wow, that's a big question. But thank you. It's a good one, actually.
You've got 5 minutes. Go.
Okay. Yeah, I could really get very detailed and granular. Do you have a couple of days? No, but honestly, I think Provost Jersky, that my advice would be to do what you're doing right now in the context of this conversation, is to connect. So my advice to students, to faculty, to staff, to the campus community is to take the opportunity to just connect, right? And I think that really relates to what Ilan was saying and what Jeanelle was saying, and even Lewis, in terms of talking about using Zoom to connect with, people who are important to moving your students' education forward, right? And empathy and also self-care, right? And what that looks like is, for me anyway, as a sociologist, is perhaps, and this is a challenge, is sometimes just me being quiet. That's the challenge, but also the observer self, right? And it's very, very easy to get caught up in all of the craziness, the news cycle, or just, someone sent an email out, and then there's, all of this cascade of email, or, my phone is just texting, all these texts, and I'm just really, really trying to focus myself on observing, okay, so here's all of this stress, and really kind of choosing to connect to what's important to me, my priorities, as Ilan was saying. And one of those is to be empathetic and flexible and to see my students, right? And that really helps with the connection, is to be able to see. And I just 1 minute here with regard to how my advice to the campus community really meshes with the opportunities or silver linings provided by COVID, is that, it really did force me to step back and re-examine particularly my pedagogy, and also my research as well, how I do my research, but how I teach. And a lot of the trainings that were offered this summer were really powerful, particularly the ones that were informed by Quality Matters. And just going through, just aligning, it may sound really odd, but aligning, filling out the course alignment blueprint, where you align your student learning outcomes with module outcomes with, meaningful and appropriate assessments, right? And you scaffold the learning. And I could see some real gaps, and I kind of fixed that. And then when I went into the classroom in fall, I was anxious, but and I had a large section, 116 of intro, Social 100. And I was like, oh my gosh, how am I gonna, but it was phenomenal, Brian, because I was able to connect, Provost Jersky, sorry. I was able to connect with my students. But in a way, the Zoom format, and I understand that they would have preferred to be there in person, but the Zoom format, I could see all of their names and a lot of their faces in a way that I really couldn't in a large lecture hall. And I could hear their voices through the chat and through the use of anonymous polling in a way that really wasn't possible. And also even using the breakout rooms, was much more flexible in terms of format than being in the physical space. So, there was so much of the silver lining there in terms of my teaching experience that I was blown away by how connected I was to my students this semester and how I was able to respond to their needs on an individual basis and do interventions. I had more students in my office hours this semester than any other semester.
Isn't that remarkable? Wow.
And it's because I reached out to them. I was able to kind of identify which students were falling behind, and I reached out to them. And that was something that really wasn't possible because, quite frankly, I was spending a lot of time getting from my house to my parking spot, to my office, to the classroom, and kind of removing all of that really opened up some opportunities that I chose to pursue in terms of connecting with my students. And so I would just suggest that the campus community find opportunities to just connect with whoever, again, it may not be on campus, but to make those connections on a daily basis. So anyway.
Well, no, I think that's again, really deep words. And I mean, I'm thinking of E.M. Forster as you talk and sort of only connect. And which one of his novels is it? I can't remember. Howard's End? No. Anyway, too bad. We'll have to expose my lack of knowledge of English, but I do know it was E.M. Forster who said that or wrote that. And you bring up an interesting point, which a lot of people don't know about, which is that faculty in CLA and the CSU in general are doing multiple things, teaching very hard, doing research and scholarly activity, and doing service to the campus, their profession, and the university as a whole. And it's a very difficult balancing act at the best of times. These are not the best of times. It's an even more difficult thing. But what amazes me, and again, just a question of how type A overachievers all of you are, that you manage to do all that while this is going on. So, I mean, Ilan, tell us a bit about your research. What have you been doing in the sort of scholarly world lately?
And there's so many people at this university who are so much more active than I am in terms of publication, but it's a little bit hard to say, like, here's what I do. But I guess I'm interested in some things that I find exciting. And so, I'm the medievalist in the English department, and I come from an interdisciplinary background in medieval studies. And so my focus is always going to be on some pretty nerdy things. I like to say that I have a PhD in chivalry, not in the sense that I do it that well, but that I study it. And so what that means on the ground is that I love reading and directing students and researching and writing about 14th and 15th century Middle English chivalric romances, which are a genre that have more to do with notions of masculine violence, monstrosity, and homosocial bonding than they might with like something romantic, which is a later idea. And so I'm always going to be interested in that. I'm also interested in a certain kind of very nerdy things with the earlier period, what we would call Old English, which is a language that's actually quite different from what we're speaking right now, but I also teach it on campus. And there's a poem that is very focused on war and weapons. What's that?
Beowulf.
Well, Beowulf is, yeah, but the story that I'm talking about right now is called the Battle of Malden, which isn't studied that much. But there's a kind of reference to weapons that uses something called synecdoche, where the part stands for the whole, and that relates to larger notions of early English communal identity versus individual identity. So I'm very interested, and I have a little project on that as well. But something that's been pushed to the fore, not just in the last 4 years, but in the last 10 years, I'd say, is a secondary research emphasis of mine, but it's also a focus of most of my graduate students and the Medieval and Renaissance Student Association, which is really active on our campus. And that's in something called medievalism, which most people who are not medievalists don't understand. And so just very briefly, medievalism is the study of how people repurpose or reproduce the Middle Ages, often in ways that don't at all resemble the Middle Ages. And so an example of this would be Game of Thrones, and the way that Game of Thrones tries to tell us that the further in time you go back, the more rape was normalized, and that sexual violence is a natural element of going backwards in time. This is not the case. And so it brings up certain questions about why that show would tell us that it's the case. More to the point now, if your eye scans any of the extremist far-right organizations or groups or activities that you can see so clearly online right now, you'll see an abundance of medieval imagery or what they are presenting as medieval imagery. Mm-hmm. Now, the references they're making have very little to do with what medieval or Renaissance people actually thought or did, especially about race. So where are they getting their originary fantasies? What authenticity are they able to garner from those references to the Middle Ages? And more importantly, for me and people in my position who are doing research on this, or my graduate students who are just starting to enter it, who is it who stands against it, right? When someone in an extreme right or an ethno-nationalist group says this is what Viking DNA is, it really is only people in the universities who can push back against that. And so that's a secondary research focus of mine, but it's become a primary concern for me. And I'm co-director of the Center of Medieval Renaissance Studies on campus. And my co-director and I, her name is Heather Graham, she's in art history. We both are committed to exploring this issue specifically while also doing more traditional work in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. I think that was a bit of a monologue. Sorry to go on.
No. It was fascinating. And you know what appealed to me so much about your answer is one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about the importance of the liberal arts in the university and the centrality of the liberal arts in a university education, because far from being an arcane specialist narrow field as it's often caricatured, it's actually essential to our knowledge and actions about the present. And so, the individual versus the collective, the role of extremism in creating narratives or choosing narratives, all those things you brought up are absolutely central to our current understanding of what it means to be an educated person. And I quite agree with you that the universities are the place where this happens. And that leads me on to my next question, which is, what do you think the future of CLA should be? And now we sort of move it. I don't want to focus on the sort of processes of, how things should be structured, but I want to hear from you, talk about setting this up, about why you think the liberal arts are still central and important and really the heart of the university. So anyone who wants to either argue with me or support that, go ahead.
I'll start. So I think that, the College of Liberal Arts and a liberal arts education that we get is so important for a holistic view of humanity. I think that because of my field, I'm a biological anthropologist, so I encounter people in STEM, in quote, hard science, and anthropologists and, people in the humanities. And so I see sort of the best of both worlds, and in the public, I see that whole, I can see reductionist sort of rhetoric, people getting boiled down to their body parts, people being boiled down to their DNA, and we're sort of ignoring all of the layers that make us complicated. And so I think a liberal arts education is really crucial to making sure that our students go out into the world and be leaders of the future world as consciously viewing humanity as a complicated ecosystem, complicated moral and ethical ecosystem, if that makes sense. So that's sort of, I think, where liberal arts education and CLA that's the role we will play for our students in the coming years, especially now that we see that how urgent it is and how important it is.
Right, navigating our way through the multiple issues that confront us and which we embody. People dichotomize and in a remarkably simplistic way about this is good, this is bad, pick one. It's very silly. Nielan, you sound as if you're dying to jump in.
Well, and Jeanelle, that was such a really powerful response. I don't know how I could add to that, but I did have a little thing, which is, in my view, one of the things that we do in the College of Liberal Arts is we teach students to understand or know how it is they know what they know. In other words, we are engaging in an epistemological exercise, right? And teaching them, hopefully, how to locate and ask questions of information and knowledge that's out there, right? And in today's world, where there's a lot of information, a lot of noise, especially through social media and through regular media, news media, we really do have to be critical consumers of information. And so one of the fundamental questions that I ask all my students is, well, how do you know this A, B, or C? And sometimes those kind of epistemological questions are really not explored in other disciplines, or they may not even be explicitly explored in many of the disciplines in the College of Liberal Arts. But I do think that it's a fundamental aspect of what we're doing here is we're teaching young people really how to build an understanding of the world that is based on asking questions about knowledge and information and being critical about that, right? Just not taking it for granted and digging deeper, right? To triangulate your data sources, not just saying, oh, I know this because my parents told me or because I read it in this book. It's like, well, go a little further. So that's really why I fundamentally believe our college is doing a huge service to the university and also, quite frankly, to our future generations.
Yeah, no doubt. It's the contribution we make to society is that epistemological maturity to say, well, gee, just because I learned this in a grade 8 history book doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. And I think it's a very interesting speculation. Lewis, from a sort of political science point of view, I mean, we certainly have been living through, what shall we say, interesting times. How does that translate into the classes you teach, into sort of the law aspect, the constitutional aspect of things?
We teach them to recognize what's true from what's not true. And I don't mean that in a politically correct sense. I mean that in the marketplace of ideas sense. That rather than, and I don't want to touch on a subject that maybe I shouldn't get into, but rather than counsel, debate back is what I'm saying. That's the classic marketplace of ideas that's just in the law, right? Oliver Wendell Holmes. So to your question about politics, I teach American Government 100, for basically 200-person class, 4 sections of 50 is how I've broken it up, and we sort of try and get into and talk about these issues. And yeah, it's extraordinarily challenging. these are things that I just didn't think I'd ever see. And I was raised in a home by people who disliked Richard Nixon, and I never thought that I would see or a president that would, and not to take a political position, but these issues that people are debating about on the left and the right, and a president impeached twice. I'm not saying whether I agree or disagree with the former president, but impeached twice. So in my lifetime, 3 presidents have been impeached, and 2 of them this year, or in the last 13 months, right? A federal judge, let me just end with this. A federal judge once said we were at his courthouse, and he once said to one of my students, he said, "Son, I don't believe a word you just said, but I believe that you believe it." And that's, in our world of the law, that's kind of what matters. Now, I'm not an attorney, but to attorneys, that's like the ultimate compliment. You know what I'm saying?
Lewis, that's a very interesting connection with what Jeanelle said originally about the complexity of our consciousness. Let's move to something just sort of as we're ending off here, because, I mean, goodness, we could go on forever. This is just such an incredibly interesting conversation, and just confirms what I said earlier to everyone, that our faculty is filled with intense, exciting, creative, and wonderful people. And it could go on for 3 hours, but we can't. So let's do something sort of fun and light in terms of what one of you said earlier. We've got to look after ourselves. So Ilan, have you sort of come up with any new hobbies, new interests, baking, creating, anything in the last while that sort of kept you whole?
I mean, I think that it's really important in academia at every level for people to develop a healthy work-life balance. I really do. I think that, that we get to do something that we love, in some ways comes back and gets us later, and that we become entirely about it. And that's true for me, maybe more than everybody else, because I've always loved medieval stuff because I'm a huge nerd. And so that's a long way of saying that I have not developed any new hobbies, but I've never really had a lack of them. I've been able to lean into them a little bit more, and in ways that are COVID and quarantine friendly. So I love playing board games, which is a kind of nerdy, very specialized thing, and my family does too. And so we do a lot of that. I should say, as a side note, I think, Jeanelle, that you have my daughter in your class. Her name is Eloise.
Oh yes, I do. Ella, or
yeah, Ella. Yeah, she goes by Ella. Yeah, and right off the bat, she was like, "This is going to be a good professor." And so I just wanted to share that with you. I think she wouldn't mind me saying that.
Talk about Only Connect, and here it is.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about Long Beach. So I have a number of hobbies, and I am involved in a number of what we would call enthusiast history groups. And I find that to be like critically interesting, but also just nerdy fun. So I haven't developed anything new, but I have a healthy life outside of my research and teaching.
Well, that's good
and
to
service.
hear. That's good to hear, and great to hear. I also like board games, by the way, but we can talk about that another time.
Yeah, we should. Yeah. Or you could join the Medieval Renaissance Student Association, who has a board game night that's going to be medieval and Renaissance themed.
Ah, okay. I was thinking bubonic plague, but let's not get too dark here. But Jeanelle, any new hobbies, or have you been so busy settling into the new role that you kind of...
Oh, well, I actually started collecting houseplants. I'm actually running out of space for them. I guess I just wanted some green, some nature next to my desk. You can't see, but everything here, you can see some of them, but everything here is just plants, pots,
Oh, how
plants.
beautiful. That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
What a literally enriching thing to do. So thanks for sharing that. How about you, Nielan? Anything you've done to kind of bring a smile to your face?
Well, yes, actually, like Jeanelle, I tried doing a bit more gardening. I'm upstairs, so I have a little balcony, and but I don't really enjoy that so much. So one of the things that has come up in terms of enjoyment for me, provoked by COVID, is that I have a young niece and nephew. They're 10 and 7. And my brother, because they're homeschooling now, my brother asked if I could help. And so every week for an hour on Tuesday and an hour on Friday, I spend time with the kids, helping them with their homework and such. And so I've actually been able to spend more time with my niece and nephew, my brother and his family, than normal because of COVID. And it's really been just something that has fed me and sustained me through this really challenging time.
So go ahead, Lewis.
Real quickly, bike riding. In fact, I rode 10 miles today, so bike riding. But more to the point, I helped coach my son in mock trial. He would come in and sit here and practice while I was running tournaments and just running the Zoom, and he would practice, and they finished 4th in their county. And then my daughter and I have very similar musical taste, and a couple times a week, around 8 o'clock or so at night, we will just drive up PCH, and she'll be running she'll just be running the songs, very similar taste as rock and roll. And we'll drive up, we'll go to the softball field where I used to get to coach her, trying to drive around there because you can't get out of your car, right? We'll drive over the beach. So I think I've connected with my kids in a way that wouldn't have happened had I been traveling. And the bike riding isn't so bad. So
I think you've all been absolutely incredible and really demonstrated exactly why this is such a great thing to do, and just kind of show off, the diversity, the centrality, the importance, the humanity of the faculty here in CLA. So thank you very much. And stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll get through this together, everyone. So be of good cheer and go beach. Thank you to Ulices and Abraham for being part of this conversation. We know how busy you are and really appreciate the fact that you found the extra time to just talk to us and tell us a little bit about you, which we're all very interested to hear about. So let's start with you, Abraham. I mean, how did you come to work at CSULB? What was it that drew you to us?
Yeah. So I did my PhD in Tucson, Arizona, at University of Arizona, and in an interesting way, there's actually a lot of connections between University of Arizona and Cal State Long Beach. I minored in the geography department, which boasted 3 former faculty of Cal State Long Beach. So I had sort of a relationship to the history of some of the work that was done here. I also grew up in Los Angeles. And then I think that really the thing was that when the job application or the job description came out for my particular job, it stood out among others because it was very attentive to what I would say our discipline of women's and gender studies often uses as frameworks for thinking about trans studies. It was much more open and capacious than most other descriptions that were kind of being released in the same cycles. And then the reason I think that I came to understand this is that my colleague here in the department, Dr. Stacy Macias, penned the description from a sort of location in gender studies. So we are lucky enough in our department here to have people who are actually trained in the field, which is quite unusual in most departments at this point. Most faculty come from sociology or history or anthropology or related fields, but not necessarily a training in the field. And so I think that the draw was that I could recognize that she was sort of thinking about it from these frameworks that I had dedicated my study to. And upon coming to the campus visit, I felt convinced of that and was very happy to take the job.
Fantastic. Well, we're so glad that we could attract you. And of course, the same for you, Ulices. You're in history, but and I know that one of your specialties is in revolutions and social movement, and we've certainly had a few of those lately. So, but what attracted you to Cal State Long Beach?
Yeah, I did my PhD not far from here at UC San Diego. We have a really good Latin American history program there. And it's close proximity to Mexico and Latin America in general. So we've always had a strong institute there and good relationships. I got my first postdoc at Colorado College. So it took me to Colorado Springs, spent 2 years there, learning how to teach, essentially small discussion-based learning. And then, this job was advertised, and I kept getting calls from people and emails. They're like, "Hey, your job just came out." Because everyone knows I'm from Long Beach. I was born and raised here. They were looking for somebody who studied modern Mexican history, but also, had a background in Latin American history. And yeah, so I was like, this is an opportunity for me to come home. I was like, this is my job. I'm going to get this job. But the reality of the job market is really daunting, right? So I submitted my application, and got the interview, and it was great. Like, my future colleagues were really personable, and it was more of a conversation, and got me even more excited. And then I heard relatively quick, came to the campus visit, and it was just a bit surreal because I left Long Beach when I was 17 to go to college. My parents still live here, but I'd only come back for the holidays. And I remember getting off the airplane here in Long Beach, and I'm like, wow, this is like weird. I'm like coming back to my hometown for an interview. And just meeting the students and everything else is just kind of reinforced, like, this is where I want to be, and this is where I should be.
So how fantastic. I mean, combination of serendipity and your talent, and here we are today. How fantastic. I mean, you mentioned, learning how to teach, and that's a perfect segue to my next question. I mean, one of our issues has been, of course, the global pandemic and the so-called alternative modes of instruction. How have you sort of managed that transition? What surprised you? How have you adapted your teaching? I mean, I'm dying to know.
Yeah, I would say my teaching style is usually a combination of lectures, because history, you have to provide a lot of context, but also discussion-based learning. As I mentioned, I learned how to teach at a liberal arts institution, so I always try to incorporate that. In this format, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to just get in front of Zoom and give a lecture that's 45 to 50 minutes long. I found myself not doing that because I just couldn't do that. I had to shorten my lectures, edit them down, streamline them, really think about what is it that the students need to know in this context, and then incorporate the discussion board, which I'd never ever used before, for reflections on the lecture. And I was actually quite surprised with how engaged our students are and how much they embraced it. They normally in lecture, when I lecture, you get a couple of hands for clarification, or they want you to expand upon a couple of points in the lecture, but that's about it. But in the discussion board, I found a lot of students are writing like anywhere from like 400 to 500 words just reflecting on the lecture, and that is incredible. That shows like in-depth engagement with what I'm saying. So for me, sort of incorporating the discussion board, it just seems like a simple activity, but it just speaks to how engaged our students are, even given the terrible circumstances that a lot of them are thrown. Given a lot of them have taken up jobs. I've gotten quite a few emails with students having health issues. So yeah, I would say just doing little things like that.
Amazing. Well, I think that's a huge insight, and from what I know, I mean, as instructors, I guess we all enjoy lecturing, but they say that neurologically the human brain can sort of only accept 10 minutes at a time of that kind of instruction, and so this is kind of perfect. So based on your research, which I think is in both of your cases is very apposite for the times we're negotiating at the macro and the micro level, what would you advise me as the provost or your departments or deans? How can we navigate this time successfully?
Well, there's recommendations, I don't want them to be read as digs at the administration, but
they won't be.
The way I was thinking about this was sort of two philosophers that kind of dominate my work are Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari. And these are French philosophers coming out of the early 1900s and particularly engaged in what was called May 68 in France and in Paris, which then sort of spirals out across the globe, right? And there's these sort of Similar to maybe most recently something like Black Lives Matter, Occupy Wall Street, we see this kind of global transmission of this politic, right? And one of the sort of key ways they discuss this is this term transversality, which they kind of lay out as this ethical and political and social and aesthetic tool that's really geared at the maximizing of communications between different types of groups, but also between groups, right? And also sort of creating linkages between those groups. So for instance, in 68, the way they talk about this is union workers and students joining forces to strike against sort of imperialism, right? That plus thinking about the ways that minoritarian life, which we sort of often term in gender studies around these questions of intersectionality at this point, but really what it means to sort of be minoritarian is just the lack of access to the resources you need to expand your life chances, right? So this is kind of the tool they're using. But one of the things, the insights that I would take from it that I think about how to, and remember, these are philosophers, so they are academics, right? They're very much thinking about the community of a university life. And they talk about the need to organize more horizontally rather than sort of neoliberal models of top down, and how can we open up these lines of communications and sort of ally in these different ways. So I think for this to kind of be entertained, right, the recommendation to like a campus like ours, I don't know about now, right, but as we move forward is to sort of take stock of the ways that our campus is situated within a political dynamic, right, and to not imagine ourselves as somehow isolated from the political culture that we're living in, and instead sort of attend to and take lead on some of these issues. So for instance, what we've been able to do with the Trans Advocacy Coalition with the support of Dr. Connolly has been to really diversify our strategy immediately across the university. And that didn't really take much except for support. And I see a lot of these sort of initiatives that we can kind of partner on, but I think it means to take seriously a political movement and not try and sort of play both sides of the fence, right? But rather sort of attend to the ways that our campus is a political campus, right? Having so many brown students on a campus inherently makes it a political campus, and attending to those needs, which I think students have made quite clear, faculty are making clear, right, that we have these needs for our campus and for our community, which are explicitly political, that need to be sort of driven by the administration in order for us to kind of demonstrate to other campuses in the CSU system, but also other campuses in general, that we want to take the lead on issues of equity, or we want to take the lead on issues of diversity, and not in a way that just sort of pays lip service to those terms, but in a way that really changes fundamentally the kind of lives we can live on campus as workers, as learners, as teachers, so on and so forth.
It's fascinating. And can I just ask you something before I hear from Ulices? Because I mean, one of my questions about academic administration is why the university is organized in a 19th century Prussian model of departments, producing widgets. And my goal would be to try to dissolve departments to precisely produce that kind of horizontality that you're talking about. Now, I mean, obviously there's a need for some kind of administration and bureaucracy. We understand that. But I would love to see that kind of, bleeding in between the silos or cylinders of excellence, as we pretend. And, it's quite recent that universities have had departments. The kind of late 19th century innovations to help administration. And that would be a fascinating topic to discuss. I'd love to discuss it further. But so what advice would you have for our students, for our campus? I mean, you've given some advice. I mean, so much of my day goes from the very minute to the very large. And, I'm sure that's true of you as well. But what advice would you have? I think, I think of our freshman students coming into the university a few weeks ago. And my experience when I stepped onto the campus as a freshman, and just, my goodness, what a change. And what would you say? I mean,
I can speak to that.
Yeah.
So I'll give two things. The first is, there's light at the end of the tunnel, right? This is a new normal, but this isn't permanent. The second, I try to empathize with the students. I try to situate myself in their position. Like the same, when I started college, it was exciting. I was on the campus. There was a buzz. There was you felt like you were a part of a larger community, right? And I do think sometimes that's lacking. Even with myself, I'm a second-year assistant professor. I came last year and it was great. I met all my colleagues. I was able to chat with them in the hallways and everything. That was good. But then I think of our new assistant professors that came this year, and they don't have that sense of community, right?
Yeah.
They haven't met everyone, in person. And I think our students are going through a very similar process, especially the junior college transfers, and especially the first years as well. One of the things that I've done to try to build some sort of community within my own department, which I think students can actually do as well, is form little study groups. With the two new assistant professors that arrived, we have 1 day a week. It's a Friday. We spend about 2 hours. If we have time, somebody has to leave for a meeting, they leave. But we have a Pomodoro technique where we work for 25 minutes, then we just debrief for 5 minutes, work another 25 minutes, debrief 5 minutes. And in between there, we not only talk about our work, but we talk about what's going on. We share teaching best practices, what's going on in each other's lives. And I think sort of building that little nucleus, building that sort of sense of community, it's just important. We're all human beings. And I think, the way our university is structured, we have big classes, but we also have small seminars. And I think there are a lot of opportunities where students can form these groups. I know in my department, Slack is a really good app that we all use, and that at least allows the students to communicate with each other. Maybe forming study groups, and Zoom really allows that nowadays, where you can actually talk about the readings and so I think forming a community outside of just the formal classroom, I think for me has a much more greater importance than it did maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely essential. I mean, I sometimes, am willing to go to extremes and say that in my education, it was the outside the classroom groups that I was lucky enough to find and join that produced more of my education than the in-classroom groups. But of course, I don't mean that in the extreme. But
it's even the little things. We were having a conversation yesterday in class, and they went in the little breakout rooms, and I guess they were talking about the squirrels on campus.
Oh, great.
Because they were the students that have been here before were talking about the squirrels, and they were all worried about the squirrels. And the new students were like, "Oh, I don't know, like what are the squirrels?" So just those little things that probably happen just outside offices and everything else. I think that's what makes Long Beach State like a really great place. It's a beautiful campus. It's unfortunate.
That kind of joining a culture of academic inquiry is that much harder via Zoom than sort of walking onto a campus and feeling, gosh, this is a space devoted to intellectual excitement and discovery. Talking of that, I mean, how sort of moving the focus away from your students and to yourselves, I mean, how has your research, scholarly activity been challenged or perhaps, encouraged during this time?
I think for me, it's been both. I received a small faculty grant, so it was great. I was able to go to Mexico.
Congratulations. Yeah.
I went to Mexico in January before all this even happened.
Good timing. Yeah, timing is everything in life.
Research. But all this changed. But I found some very interesting material about a conspiracy that was hatched in 1925 to attempt to overthrow the Mexican government. It was like an international conspiracy with political exiles in San Antonio, Texas, connected with former rebels fringe groups in like central Western Mexico. And as I was writing it, I didn't really think about how salient it would be to what's going on now, to like what just happened and everything else. But I was able to write that during COVID. I have a 3-year-old. So it was very difficult, and my wife is an academic, so to balance all that out. So I would have to wake up like at 5 in the morning to kind of get my writing in, clear your head, and I was able to write. And I was actually able to finish the article, and I submitted it to the Journal of Social History, got it revised and resubmit, and I just resubmitted it again. So
fabulous. Wow, what a great story. I'm kind of smiling from ear to ear. That's a great.
So yeah, the world is falling apart, but I managed to get something done.
Wow, fantastic. Well, I mean, I certainly couldn't top that, but Abraham, I'm sure you can. So what's your what's been your activity?
Yeah, you know, it feels a little paradoxical, but I've also had a fairly productive year here. You know, it's interesting because I think the thing that I miss so much about being on campus is the thing that makes work feel less work-like, right? The sort of conversations or the getting to touch base with, you know, friendly faces, friendly colleagues. But you know, I think the thing that is notable about that, right, is how much time it takes when it's away. And so I think in some senses, you know, teaching 3 classes and having a sort of vibrant campus life is quite a bit of work, right? And so something about the home space has definitely produced a space where I can get a little bit more research done than I was able to do in my first couple of years in the job. So I'm working on a number of things. I just finished a couple of articles over the last couple of months, but also working on my book project, and I was able to onboard a job is what it is. It's 2 extra jobs that don't pay, but I'm the editor, the general editor of TSQ Transgender Studies Quarterly.
Wow, impressive.
Yeah, so that's published by Duke, and then I just signed on to do a critical theory and trans studies book list with Bloomsbury Press, and so that editing work has been really generative of my own writing and my own scholarship. So getting to edit as a sort of strategy of learning differently. So I feel like, you know, as much as I've had extra time to sort of read and think about my own interests, that editing has pushed the bounds of those interests. So historically, I think I was saying early when we first got on the call that my work has sort of looked at revolutions in the 1960s forward, and it's really transformed through this sort of editing work and through writing with colleagues in this kind of Pomodoro style, actually, which allows us to sort of briefly dialogue about an idea or something like that and really pushes it in a different direction. So I would say research-wise, I've been able to sort of see different ways of doing research, organizing research. My partner is also an academic, so we have a home full of research at this point. I would say we don't prefer it that way, so happy to go back at some point. But in general, it has been a really important time to think. And part of what I was able to do, because we weren't on campus, was do some political work in Minneapolis after the murder of George Floyd. And that had really, I mean, we were there for a few weeks, and that really shaped a lot of the article work that I've been doing right now. And it's really helped to embody some of the philosophical commitments that I have.
Yeah. You know, it what strikes me so forcibly about what you're saying, what you're both saying, is the, I won't say it's random, but the arbitrary nature of an academic career, and that it's almost like Brownian motion. You know, you do your PhD in something. I did mine in time series, of all things. You know, I'm a statistician, and then I went on to other things. And it's that, you know, I thought being on a campus, you know, you're exposed to different people, they give you different ideas. But I think the academic reach into the world is so important to kind of inspire you to think, well, wait, why is that? And how does this involve me? And both of you have said very powerfully how that is still happening. And that makes me so happy, because not only are we educating students or co-educating students with them and their experiences, but creating new knowledge, extending human endeavors in all the fields that we work in, and that's the truly exciting and inspirational part of being an academic. So that's wonderful that it's still going on. You talked about going to Minneapolis and becoming involved in some political activity, which I think is both very tempting and exciting. Have you done anything to relax, to take time off, to reward yourself? Have you created space to nurture yourself, which you can model for all of us and our students?
Yeah, I do, and I have, and I
Great. Tell me about it.
Yeah, this is, I think, a commitment we should all have, right? To a balanced life. I think we have the right to a balanced life. And I would say that, I have onboarded a number of hobbies, in fact, but not the least of which is online teaching. That's definitely takes time of mine. But I would say, a couple things off the top of my head. My household, my partner and I, we've sort of committed to growing more of our food, being more sustainable at home, allowing ourselves the time and energy to grow that food. I'm a big proponent of meditation. I've done a lot of that in this time, and I've sort of onboarded a project that has nothing to do with my sort of usual research on forests that I'm very, very excited about, and would recommend to you. The New York Times Daily did a podcast where they read a story that's in the Times. So if you subscribe to the Times, you can get it, but if you don't, the Daily reads the story to you, and it's called The Social Life of Forests, and it's about this Canadian researcher who essentially, the sort of provocative claim is that we have to take the forest as an ontological site. So we can't chop it up. The forest is in essence itself.
I've read it, actually. It's a fascinating book. I completely second, they're actually, so.
And I was very compelled by the sort of hormone sharing, the rhizal networks, the mycorrhizal sort of communication, and the species kind of jumping as a political provocation, right? Like what happens when we sort of reorient to these kinds of interstitial or rhizomatic kind of structures when we think about our politics. That's what I've been doing, and a lot of good movies.
Great. Well, it sounds fantastic. It sounds like you are looking after yourself as you should. So that's great. Abraham, how about you, Ulices?
I would say I've probably lost
3-year-old.
probably lost copies over the course of this entire pandemic. But that said, I've managed to do a couple of things. I think the first and foremost, I feel like since this past March, I've been able to even have an even deeper, stronger bond with my son. And I think that's
great.
He's been out of daycare, so we've been his primary, caretakers, full time. But just little things, taking him to a park to run around, and just kind of enjoying him as a 3-year-old. I think that's number one. Second thing is I've been able to play more guitar. Now with the technology, like I can literally plug in my electric guitar into a little device and plug it into my headphones, and I do not disturb the family. My son's asleep, and that's some release time. And I love playing music. And I think what's most important as well is Sunday dinners. We have one day designated a week where we all sort of drop what we're doing at a certain time and we cook together. And I think sort of having that sense of like, this is what we do as a family together, and we're all helping out, and we all sit around the table and have a meal, I think is something that I'm so happy we've established, at least during this pandemic, and hopefully continues for the rest of our lives.
That's an interesting, but two things very interesting. I just wanted to follow. What kind of music do you play?
I love playing blues, but I'll play a little bit of everything.
That's blues certainly appropriate for for the last one.
But
I guess they always are, right?
I'm not a very good singer.
Soundtrack.
Not a very good singer, but I can play okay.
It doesn't matter. I think it was Kurt Vonnegut who said that when he was a student, had a professor who asked him what he did, and he sort of said a few things, and then Kurt Vonnegut said that he wasn't very good at any of those things, and the professor said, well, the important thing is not to be good, but to do them. And so I'll sort of say the same to you. But interesting that idea of, the Sabbath, from where our word sabbatical comes. But I mean, it's so important to take time off from the mundane. Even in the interesting mundane, like research or teaching and interactions, and just be with yourself, be with your family, disengage from the world. And so that's an incredible insight. So there you are. Well, that's the bottom line, folks. If those of you who are listening, disengage. So, well, on that very deep note, I think we should sort of draw our conversation to a conclusion. But I just wanted to say how much of a joy and exciting thing it's been to meet the two of you. And it shows how much of a connection one can make, even technologically and without in-person interaction. But thank you again for taking the time. And to our listeners, these are the kinds of people you'll engage in CLA, and which emphasizes why the liberal arts are the center of the university, or any university, and why CLA is so important to all of us. So thanks, Ulices. Thanks, Abraham.